Just thought I'd make a video about some of the experiences that I had in welding school that might be useful for somebody who's thinking about going to a welding school or already in welding school, just starting in welding school. So I graduated welding school almost 2 years ago. I graduated in October of 23, and since then I've thought about things that would make my experience more efficient and better in welding school if I wanted to be the best welder possible. And some of them I did, some of them I didn't do, and I wish I'd have done. So starting off, the big one that I saw happen a lot when I was in school is not utilizing the time that you have effectively inside and outside of school. So you're afforded an opportunity at most weld schools to weld and weld a lot. And if you want to maximize your potential with the opportunity that you have to learn how to weld and to weld a lot, you need to have a clear mind and you need to be able to focus right. And a lot of what I saw for a few people when I was at weld school is there was a lot of partying. And you know, when you're going and you're partying a couple of nights a week, that can severely impact your ability to weld, stay focused all day, work hard all day, you know, stay hydrated all day because you're a little hungover. And you know, all of that just affects your ability to work hard, work efficiently, think properly, focus properly. And you really need to view the opportunity for what it is. There will be another time in your career, more than likely, where you have the amount of time allotted to you, whether that be 4 months, 6 months, 10 months in my case. If you go to like the community college, it may be a couple of years, you may not have the opportunity afforded to you for the rest of your career to have that much time set aside to welding. And if you waste the opportunity more or less on not being focused, not being prepared, not having, you know, not being able to give it your best, that can severely affect your career down the line. And so if you're going into school and you're just starting out, or you're thinking about going to school, really think about what you need to do to get yourself in a position to be as focused as possible, to get the best sleep that you can, to minimize the amount of drinking that you're doing because that does affect your ability to work, and the amount of partying that you're doing and staying out late and such like that. So I think that's a really important thing when you're first getting into welding school, is to keep that in mind. The second big thing, and this necessarily isn't a big deal in school, it is a big deal once you get out of school. Every job you go to is going to drug test you. Some of them might be urinalysis, some of them might be hair follicle. If you are smoking pot, and I live in Ohio, it's recreationally legal, they just made it recreationally legal here. If you're smoking pot, you will fail a urinalysis, you will fail a hair follicle. Now, you can cheat a urinalysis, you know, there's a million ways that people do it. You know, you can, if you really want to go do that, you can go figure out how to do it, and you'll probably have some degree of success. But if you fail one and you need that job, you don't get that job, and it could affect your ability to get a job later. And hair follicle tests are typically 90-day hair follicle tests, so you can't cheat that. You have to be clean. And you might miss out on an opportunity for a job down the line if you're smoking pot or, you know, some other drug, or, you know, something beyond that. But realistically, if you're smoking pot, you really need to consider the fact that you might either need to get off of it, start getting off of it, because for me, I don't smoke, I never have. Not smoking has afforded me more job opportunities because I'll get a call, we've got a refinery, got an emergency shutdown, it's hair follicle, can you pass it? Yes. Okay. That just, you know, as a baseline, being clean allows me to get those opportunities and take those opportunities and capitalize on them. So that's an important thing that I think that you need to think about while you're in school, getting ready to go take a job, you know, getting into schools. You need to think about your relationship with marijuana. I think that's an important thing. Another thing to consider is, if you haven't already gotten into school, where you're going to go to school. I would not typically recommend going too far away from home. In my case, when I graduated high school, I lived in Texas, and I moved to Ohio without the intention of going to welding school. And then I ended up going to welding school at Hobart Institute of Welding Technology in Ohio. I would not necessarily recommend moving from, say, Texas to an Ohio to go to Hobart, even though it is a great school and I really enjoyed my time there. It's not necessarily worth it. Now, some schools are better than other schools. If you want to go down the rabbit trail of what people think are better schools than other schools, feel free. There's more than enough people talking bad about other schools. But I can just speak to my experience. Hobart was a great experience. And I have worked with people who have gone to other schools who were less than impressed by their experience at their schools. So do your research, do a walkthrough, look at the curriculums. See how much time you're allotted. Some schools, if you can't pass a weld test within a certain period of time, they just kick you out. At Hobart, obviously, you do have to pass weld tests at some point. However, the weld tests start small and they get progressively bigger. So you're not taking a weld test on 6G pipe, 4 weeks in, which I don't think you do at any schools. But you start off really small and you build your way up. Now the downside is if you go to Hobart, the pipe welding class, called a major, the pipe fitting major, is 10 months. So some schools are only 6 months. Hobart is 10 months. I think for what you get out of Hobart and the amount of time you're allotted to weld, I don't think that's a bad thing. But it's something to keep in mind. Do your research, check your schools. I wouldn't necessarily consider going too far out of state, and don't overextend yourself. And that leads into the next topic, which is the money aspect of school. Welding schools are getting significantly more expensive in recent years. When I went to Hobart, I believe it was $20,000, and I believe now it is $26,000. I'm not positive on that. You could go look on their website if you wanted to. And a large portion of that is cost of material. Cost of steel has gone up significantly. And for Hobart is a nonprofit organization, so they're actually on the cheaper end of welding schools. I know a lot of welding schools are upwards of $30,000, some are a little bit more, I believe. So the cost of welding school can also be a significant factor. You will see a lot online about, well, it's okay if you go into debt to go to a trade school because you're just going to get a job and pay it off quickly. That's not necessarily always the case. You might get to weld school and you suck. And you might struggle and plow and get your way through it, and you're just not the best at it, at a particular process or a couple of processes. You might only be able to do one process proficiently. And so when you get out of school, everybody tells you, well, you're going to make $40 an hour, $50 an hour, $60 an hour. You might be able to, your market value might be such that you can get $25 an hour, which is still not bad. I mean, that's still doable for a lot of areas. But if you go to school and you spend $30,000 and then you tack on another $20,000 of living expenses on top of that, and say you had to put all that on credit while you were at school because you didn't have any money saved up or you didn't have a job, getting out of school with $50,000 of debt or $40,000 of debt can be a significant hamper on your start to your career. It can restrict your options. It might restrict your ability to, if you want to be a travel welder, that amount of debt could be a restriction to your ability to be a travel welder. So those are all things that you need to think about before you go to weld school. At least for Hobart, I don't know if this specifically applies to other schools. There are a bunch of scholarships you can apply for your tuition, to get your tuition paid down. There's a bunch of state grants, at least in Ohio, for going into the trades to get your trade school paid down. I would recommend for most people, this is what I did, is I got a job while I was in school. I was working almost full time. I was working between 35 and maybe 45 hours a week on a good week. I would recommend working while you're in school, if nothing else, because it keeps you focused. It keeps you focused on what you're doing. You're treating school like a job, and then you're going to work to make a little bit of money, and then you're going home and you're going to sleep so you can get up and go to school, which doesn't sound like the sexiest and nicest thing you can do, but if you're trying to optimize your experience and you want to stay focused and get the most out of it, I think staying, at least for me, it worked the best, is staying in that mindset of I'm working for a short period of time, for 10 months in my case, for 10 months to get the best result possible for my career. And I found that to be very helpful. I know maybe for some people you can't work that much or you can't work at all. To each their own. You just need to be aware of the real living expenses and the real costs you are incurring if you go take out a bunch of loans and then you turn out to not be great at this career field, or not be exceptional to the point that your marketability is such that your student loans are an irrelevant amount of money, which I think even if you're making $50 an hour, $30,000 in debt isn't an irrelevant amount of money. And then once you start going into the next little section, once you start getting closer to the end of your time at school, if you've got two options, you can go into a union apprenticeship, which is, I am in the plumbers and pipe fitters. You can go into a union apprenticeship, or you can go work for a non-union company. Personally, and I believe this would probably be a conversation for down the road, I would direct young people and people in general towards the plumbers and pipe fitters. I think it's a better career path, is what I think it is. But if you're going to go for the non-union side, you're going to be taking a bunch of tests when you're in school for a bunch of different companies. And if there's anything I can say, because I got a non-union job right out of weld school, is you want to take a bunch of weld tests for a bunch of different companies and get very comfortable taking weld tests. Because you're going to fail some, you're going to do really well on some. Some companies are going to give you really poor offers. Some companies are going to give you really good offers. Some companies are going to give you more than you would expect to get. And, you know, if you take only the second option, the second offer that you've gotten from a weld test that you've passed, and you just take it, you might be boxing yourself in and removing opportunities that you would otherwise have. When I was in weld school, I probably took a dozen weld tests, took a couple out-of-state weld tests while I was still in school, got some job offers, and you know, just to give you a scope of where it's at for you coming right out of school on the non-union side, the highest offer that I got was for $34 an hour as a combo pipe welder out in Indiana, and the smallest starting offer that I got, I believe, was $21 an hour for a company out in Iowa. The company out in Iowa had a bunch of, you know, for a non-union company, really nice benefits, nice insurance, nice PTO, stuff like that. So their pay was a little bit less because their benefits were, you know, a little bit more in comparison to the rest of the market. But your spread can be anywhere from $21 to say $35 coming right out of school, depending on how much you're willing to travel, what kind of welder you are, how proficient can you pass X-ray tests right off the rip. You know, that is what demands your value in the market. And I think if you look at, say, a Western Welding Academy video where they say how much are you worth an hour, you see them shorts on YouTube all the time, or TikTok. You know, the how much are you worth an hour videos, there's some wild numbers that get thrown out there, because not every job has per diem. A lot of jobs don't have per diem. And if you're going out of weld school, or coming to the end of your time at weld school, and you're thinking, well, I'll probably get a job for 40 and 130. There's not a ton of jobs for kids coming right out of weld school making 40 and 130. That's just the reality of the situation. After you have a couple of years, that's probably doable. But coming right out of weld school, that's just it's not terribly realistic. It's possible, but it's not terribly realistic. And, but you do want to get the best lay of the land for what you have to provide to the market. In terms of what kind of income you can demand right out of weld school. And I would recommend taking as many weld tests as possible for as many companies as possible. Again, I went to Hobart. Bunch of employers come through Hobart. They do testing at Hobart. Bunch of companies have sites close to Hobart to go take tests at. And so they afford you the opportunity to take a bunch of weld tests, which is a really good thing. Now, if you want to go into the union side, you just go to, if you say you go to Hobart and you're from Lima in Ohio, which is about 40 miles north of Hobart, you know, you go up there and you file your apprenticeship application, and you go take a test, and then if you pass that and they have got spots and you wait for a little bit, you get into the apprenticeship, and then you get your time, you get your hours. Maybe you go into the apprenticeship with a couple of weld certs. You go do your 5 years, finish your apprenticeship out. Maybe you go in as a second year apprentice, do your 4 years, finish your apprenticeship out, and then you journey out. And that's a much more straightforward process. You know, you know what your income's going to be day one. You know what your income's going to be when you finish, and you get new negotiations every year, every couple of years, for your income. You know, will always be on an upward trajectory over time. So that's a much more straightforward process, and the tests are much more standardized across the board. I have a UA 15, 18, 21, 41, and 63, which is a 2-inch TIG carbon, an orbital weld cert, a 2-inch stick cert, dissimilar metals TIG cert, and a monster TIG stick combo monster cert. And those are much more standardized across the union, across the whole country, and so you know exactly where you stand across the board. So those are just some things that I thought of that I thought might be really important for somebody either looking at going into weld school or already in weld school, just starting. You know, maybe you're starting to look for a job. Just some things that I thought were valuable, and maybe hopefully you can get some value out of that as well. And maybe you can learn something, maybe you can apply that into your career. And I hope you all do well, and appreciate your time today. Have a good one. Bye-bye.